I love to ride roller coasters, and they're one of my favorite things to do. But this wasn't always the case. See, growing up, I was scared to death of roller coasters. And I made excuses all the time why I didn't want to ride roller coasters. I would go to theme parks with my friends and things like that, and they would beg and beg and beg and make fun of me and just trash me and dog me. So I would always make excuses like, well, I'll go later on today, or I can't really do it because the doctor said I have a disease that prohibits me from riding anything scary, and so I really can't do it. I would always make excuses. And my excuses to me was as good as riding the ride. But when I finally rode a roller coaster, you know what? I loved it. It was awesome. It was totally better than making excuses and coming up with reasons why I didn't want to do it, even if I was freaked out. You know, I loved riding roller coasters. It was either that or I just didn't want my friends to leave me with the nickname Pampers for the rest of my life. See, as we talk about trusting God, it works the exact same. Trusting God has to be more than just the words that are coming out of your mouth. It has to provide movement. In fact, when the Bible talks about trusting God, it uses a Greek word, and the Greek word is pistuo. Pistuo actually means faith that is moving. That's what our trusting God should look like. It requires movement. It's kind of like if somebody were to run up to you and say, "Free candy!" You wouldn't just stand there. If you're like me, you'd freak out and go run to wherever the free candy was. That's exactly what trusting God is like. Trust is an action word. It's a verb. It requires movement. See, trust without movement would be like, you telling a friend you were going to come over and stay the night and not actually showing up. Or, walking into school one day without your homework and just saying, well, I was going to do it, and expecting that to get you an A. Or what if you walked into a store, stole something, put it in your pocket, walked out of the store, and they caught you, and your excuse was, well, I was going to pay for it. That'd get you thrown in jail. Trusting God is the exact same way. We have to put our faith into action. If we have a relationship with Christ, we can't just sit on the sidelines. We can't just do nothing. We can't just show up at church and just sit back and watch. We have to move. If God's calling us to a relationship with Him, it has to require action on your part. It says it in the Bible. James 2:17 says, faith, if not accompanied by action, is dead. The guys that followed Jesus were everyday, ordinary people. I mean, some of them were fishermen and some of them were tax collectors. They had ordinary lives. And Jesus walks on the scene and He just says two words to them. He says, follow me. Trust requires movement. What do you think they did? Do you think they just stood around and waited on their buddies or their family to go, you know what, I think this guy's probably safe, you should go ahead, take off after him? No. They immediately dropped their nets, got rid of their past, and walked and followed Jesus immediately. See, they hoped that by dropping everything, their lives were going to be better. They trusted God with their actions. See, it'd be really easy if God asked us to do easy stuff all the time. But most of the time, working in a relationship with God, God's going to ask you to do things outside of the norm. He's going to ask you to do things that are hard, against the flow of the river. Have you ever went upstream of a river and tried to go against the current? It's a nightmare. That's the problem. A lot of stuff that we're going to be asked to do is hard. See, God was trying to convince us that going against the river was actually the best way. Good, bad, or ugly, we find life when we trust God and we follow after Him. So about a month ago, my wife and I were talking, and we really felt like God was calling us to move out of our house. Why? Because it turns out that the easiest thing to do, which was staying in our house, wasn't the best thing to do. We needed to free ourselves up from debt and from stuff that we'd been tied to. And we really felt like God was moving in our hearts. And so we're moving. We're packing our stuff up. I don't know where we're going. We don't know where we're going to stay. But the truth is, God asked. And even though it's hard, we're following. Because we believe that trusting God is better than not trusting God. God's on our side. God's going to lead us to where we need to go. So we're moving, and we don't know really where we're going, but we trust God that if He tells us to do something and we follow, that He's going to provide for us. See, our entire life, we've never known God to walk out on us. We've never known God to ask us to do something and it not be the absolute best thing that we could have done. And so why now, in this moment when we're moving, wouldn't we trust God again? God's always been faithful. He's never let us down. So now in this moment, God is calling us to move. We're going to do it. We're doing something hard. And God's calling you to do similar things, to do hard things, that you're going to have to trust Him, that you're going to have to rely on His words and maybe not all of your understanding. So what is it that God is calling you to do? To step out in faith, to trust Him with your actions. What is it that God's calling you to do? Maybe for some of you, there's a kid at school that sits by himself and he's a loner and nobody really talks to him, and if they do, they're usually picking on him. Maybe God's calling you to step out in faith and befriend him. Be nice to him. Maybe for you, God's calling you to mend a relationship with your parents. If you fight and scream and yell and stuff like that, and your relationship is broken and you don't trust them and they always get on to you, maybe God is calling you to fix it, even if it's hard. Maybe God's just calling you to do something enormous that only He could do through you. And maybe right now it just seems impossible, but He's calling you to do it. See, trust acts even when you feel incapable. God's calling you to do something hard. Do it. He's not going to let you down. And you know what? He's going to even give you a peace that surpasses all understanding. God is calling us to trust Him with everything that we have. When times are great, we trust Him. And when times are bad, we trust Him then too. That's what God's calling us to do. We have to act on our faith. We can't just show up and be a poser and say that we love Jesus and live like mess the rest of the week. Man, we have to live out our faith in action and trust God. So take a step and trust God.